Yes, so yesterday our warrants detectives and our narcotics detectives were able to make an arrest from an investigation that began last year. And I'll kind of piece that through for you and then we can go more into detail as you ask questions. Last year in May, our units, our road patrol units, detectives, and our narcotics unit responded to an overdose death in Palm City on Ranchwood Street. The victim, born in 1983, a female, was found deceased the day after she purchased narcotics from our suspect who resides down in West Palm Beach in West Palm. Um, the narcotics detectives started doing research on her phone, talking to family members, piecing together her life history, how she got to the point of them finding her deceased, and learned that she was desperately trying not to be an addict. She'd been going to rehabs, but then checking herself out. Unfortunately, these drug dealers continued to feed her drugs, so she kept relapsing back into drug addiction. The family tried to help her. They did not want her out on the street, so they tried to keep some parameters around her, but unfortunately, her will overrode their parameters. Through the family, though, they were able to determine that our suspect, Mr. Bray, was the drug dealer that had sold her drugs the day before she was found deceased. Our narcotics unit did a really good job using sources, some of which were family members, to reach out to Mr. Bray to set up a buy bust, meaning that they called Mr. Bray, had him come to Martin County, sell more fentanyl, and were able to take him into custody and make an arrest for him selling fentanyl, using his phone to do it, and a couple other charges in that case. After that arrest, they did an interview with Mr. Bray. At that point, Mr. Bray did not know that the victim was deceased, but they asked him about drug dealing with the victim. Mr. Bray admitted that yes, the victim came down to Palm Beach County the day before. I sold her fentanyl caps and some crack cocaine. Yes, I've been selling her drugs for a while. Yes, I know that these drugs can hurt her, but that's what she wants, so I'm going to sell it to her anyway. At some point, the detectives switched their line of questioning into saying, hey, not for nothing, but our victim is actually deceased. She's passed away because of your drugs. And his response was quite flippant. Well, you know, you have your job to do, I have my job to do, and I'm sorry for her. And at one point in that interview, he said something to the effect of, yeah, I do feel bad for her. I liked her, and I didn't want her to use those drugs, but she wanted them, so I gave them to her. So he had a rather flippant response. That information, his admissions during that interview, the interviews with the family members, led those detectives to doing some really in-depth investigation over the last several months with a statewide prosecutor because there were some jurisdictional issues that needed to be figured out, who could prosecute this case, and then a lot of phone work, and of course we had to wait on toxicology reports to figure out her actual cause of death. So for the last several months, these detectives have been working diligently to piece all these pieces of information together, and yesterday was a culmination of all that information where they're able to make an arrest and bring him into custody for manslaughter in this case.
And he was arrested by the U.S. Marshals?
Yes, so our narcotics detectives, our warrants unit, and the United States Marshals Task Force went down to Palm Beach County, located him, and brought him into custody.
Now, this is the second drug dealer in the county that has been arrested and charged in the death of somebody from a fatal fentanyl overdose. Is that true?
Yes, we take these cases extremely serious. We're not just showing up to an overdose, victimless crime, and moving on to the next case. We're actually trying to track it back, and if we can, piece it together where we can make these cases. Again, you noted it's 2 cases in the last 2 years. So it's not that easy to do. It takes a lot of work, a lot of analytics go into this so they can be successful in prosecution.
One thing I was wondering, I noticed he was charged with manslaughter, not first-degree murder. Why is that? Is that based on the evidence, or?
Yes, so one of the issues, it's a legal issue actually, and it is she had several different drugs in her system, one of which was fentanyl, benzodiazepams, and I forget what the other one was. Because of the way the statute is written, if there's multiple drug toxicity and you can't prove definitively that that one drug was the cause of death, you can't charge first degree murder, or at least you could not at that time of her death. That statute has been amended to where you can do it now, but because of when she passed and the way the law was written at that time, we had to go with the manslaughter charge because that is provable. and the way the law was written, first-degree murder was not.
Now, I know that this is, again, only the second case in the county, so I don't know if you can speak on this yet, but how easy then is it? Have you seen a conviction come of a charge like this yet?
We have not. So the first case that we made last year is still pending in the courts, working its way through the process. These are serious cases, so they are litigated heavily, and it takes quite a bit of time for these cases to work their way through the judicial process.
How frustrating is it? You said he knew that she was an addict and trying to stop, but he didn't care.
Not only did he know that, he knew how bad that drug was that he was selling, and it is frustrating to us. They know these individuals are overdosing. They don't care. They're all about the almighty dollar, and that just shows you how selfish these individual drug dealers are, knowing that they could take somebody's lives, but they don't care as long as they're getting paid the money.
Knowing how flippant he was too, and based off of Angela's question, is it frustrating too that you can't charge him with first-degree murder?
Yes. So we would love to go and throw the book at them as much as we can. We have done that, but yes, we would love to charge them first-degree murder. We just can't in this case.
These two arrests earlier from last year, May and June, do you know if he had been out on bond, presumably following these, or had he been in the Martin County Jail since that time?
No, so he had done some time in our jail. These first drug charges still have not been resolved. He came, did time in our jail, bonded out, and then yesterday he was out on bond when he was picked up in Palm Beach County for the the manslaughter warrant.
It's got to feel good, at least. You know, maybe it's not the charge that you wanted, but still a charge that he's facing. That's got to feel great to come to this conclusion after so much investigating.
It is. It gives some closure. Of course, it can never bring back their loved one, but it brings some closure to the family. It sends a message to all drug dealers. This is not a victimless crime, and we're not treating it like a victimless crime. If you're selling hard drugs anywhere in Martin County and someone overdoses and dies, we will do our best to track it back and arrest you and charge you to the nth degree if possible.
Now, going off of that, you kind of talked about the fact that you guys would love to charge this guy with murder but can't because of the time. What is the message to other drug dealers that were to get charged at this point forward?
So the law has now changed. So this little caveat that gave him a loophole, this multi-drug toxicity caveat, is gone. So if we can prove it, first-degree murder will be our go-to charge, and we will make that arrest. And that is coming from our statewide prosecutor and our local state attorney, Tom Bacadol.
Was one of the investigative keys in this being able to specifically determine, like, I guess, the cause of death through the ME's office, which presumably takes many, many months. And is that perhaps, I don't want to say the delay, but because that takes so long, that toxicity process?
So you have the initial autopsy, and then they do the toxicology reports. That comes back. So that took time for that to come back. You have that issue going on. You have a lot of things you have to corroborate. You have witness statements saying that she went from this location to that location. So we go back and go through phone analytics. And then who is the most appropriate to charge the case? Is it a statewide prosecutor that does it? The drugs were sold in Palm Beach County, but she overdosed in Martin County, or does it happen in the 19th Circuit? So, those are in-depth conversations that have to take place. It does not happen overnight. So between waiting on toxicology, doing the analytic work, and then figuring out who's most appropriate to charge the case, it just takes time to appropriately bring this case into a successful prosecution. Of course, we could run right out based on what they had that night and make an arrest, but then we wouldn't necessarily be able to be victorious on the end.
Her mother must be, I don't know, relief is the right word, but happy with him.
It's bittersweet. Again, she lost her daughter in this scenario, but she's been nothing but helpful with law enforcement investigations. She's been there to try to right the wrong that was done to her daughter. Her daughter, just to tell you a little bit about our victim, she really seemed to be a sweetheart that just couldn't get out of the endless cycle of drug addiction. She, again, would go into rehabs, then check herself out. She had started to write a book about her drug addiction and trying to get off drugs. And then eventually, unfortunately, drugs caught her and killed her. And the mom has lived this. I think our victim was born in 1983. The mom has lived this for quite some time. So it's been a frustrating battle for them.
And you said this happened last year is when she died, so 2023?
Yes.
Do you know specifically, or what drugs do you suspect Mr. Bray sold her that she used to ingest and then what ultimately killed her?
Fentanyl is the primary drug let me back up. Fentanyl is the drug that's being attributed to her death. She did some benzodiazepams. She had also purchased crack cocaine, but we know based on our experience and the medical examiner's experience that generally those drugs do not cause deaths like we found in this case. There's some telltale signs of an opioid overdose death. Unfortunately, it suppresses your ability to breathe. There's certain things you see on the crime scene that were consistent with opioid overdose, not a crack overdose, which is really quite hard to do, or a benzodiazepam overdose.
Do you believe she knew she was purchasing fentanyl, or do you think it was one of the other drugs was tainted with it?
We think she knew what she was getting into. In fact, the suspect apparently had talked with her at some point about that drug and how it wasn't good, but the suspect, as long as he was making money, was willing to continue to supply her habit.
So essentially, he was arrested on a manslaughter charge in connection with selling the victim drugs that you think, or investigators say, she took and overdosed on. So you're putting the drugs on him and not like some other dealer, because presumably she may have had another dealer as well, but maybe not.
So based on the timelines, so that's one of the things that took a while for us to track back. The narcotics detectives, again, did a great job doing that. They had to go back through that timeline and figure out which drugs she purchased, when those drugs were purchased, and then how did they relate to the actual death. So they were able to go through and eliminate other suspects, which made their case as solid as it is.
And her family helped them with that?
They
mom
did.
and everyone?
Yeah, so immediately upon our deputies responding out there and our detectives, the family, they've been dealing with this for a long time. They knew who was coming and going from their house. They knew where she was going because they tracked her, trying to keep her off the streets. Specifically, they were worried about her prostituting to be able to purchase drugs. So they were doing their best to keep some parameters around her. So they had a pretty good idea of who she was dealing with, and that actually helped us. Their engagement with the problem helped us go back and make this arrest and make it successfully.
Chief, you've been doing narcotics for a long time before this, and I know you're in law enforcement, but does this ever get any easier to see for you guys?
It does not. We get out here and we started with pills, opioid pills, and we warn people about heroin and the dangers of heroin, and then it went from heroin to fentanyl, and then fentanyl to carfentanil, and then cathinones. And it just seems like no matter how much we educate, the desire for drugs and the availability for drugs is out there, and it's just a constant fight. But we're in the fight, and we're going to stay in the fight because, like I said earlier, drugs are not a victimless crime. This young lady fought this habit for a long time. She lost her life because of this quote-unquote victimless crime.
Do you believe this law with these, stricter penalties for these drug dealers, do you think it's helping?
It will help. I mean, just looking at, we charged with manslaughter because we had to, but cleaning that law up, basically the law says now we don't care if there's multi-drug toxicity. We don't care exactly, like Will said, which drug dealer sold the drugs. If we can prove that you sold drugs to this person and they're dead and those drugs are in their system, we're going to charge you with first-degree murder. So we've cleaned that law up. Florida's serious. They've allocated a lot of money for fentanyl investigations. We're using that money to the tune of several $100,000s to make these cases. So kudos to our governor, and Ashley Moody, who helps us with this.
And is Bray now in the Martin County Jail?
I'm not sure if he was transferred up here last night. Do you know?
I'll have to find out.
I'm not sure. He was arrested in Palm Beach County, and there is a process with booking him down there and bringing him up here.